Imagine this, a horrific car crash, two young lives tragically cut short, and the driver, a teenage girl, claims she can't remember a thing. Sounds like a heartbreaking accident.
Right.
But what if the evidence paints a far more sinister picture? A story of teenage turmoil, a toxic relationship, and a premeditated act that sent shockwaves through a community. That's what we're diving into today.
Oh, yeah.
You wanted to understand the McKenzie Sharilla case,
Mm-hmm.
a case that has captivated the internet and sparked endless debate. We've got court testimony, social media posts, expert analysis, the whole 9 yards to help us try and make sense of it all.
It's a case that raises so many questions, not just about guilt or innocence, but about the very nature of truth in the digital age.
Yeah.
How much can we rely on online personas to reflect reality? And how do we weigh conflicting narratives when every piece of information seems open to interpretation?
Exactly. It really makes you think.
Doesn't it?
It would. And that's precisely why we're here, to break it all down for you. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's set the stage. The crash happened on July 31st, 2022, in Strongsville, Ohio. McKenzie Sharilla, 17 years old at the time, was behind the wheel of a Toyota Camry with 2 passengers, Dominic Russo, her 20-year-old boyfriend, and Devon Flanagan, a 19-year-old friend. The car slammed into a brick building at an alarming speed, killing both. Dominic and Devon instantly. McKenzie survived, but was critically injured.
Now, initially, the story seemed pretty straightforward, a tragic accident, a young driver losing control.
Right.
But as the police began to investigate, cracks started to appear in that narrative. Details emerged that hinted at something far more calculated, something that went beyond a simple loss of control.
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers.
Yeah.
And each layer revealing something.
Right.
A little more unsettling. And one of those layers, one that really struck me, was McKenzie's claim that she blacked out during the crash and couldn't remember anything. You know, I was an offender bender years ago, nothing compared to this tragedy.
Yeah.
But I still can't recall the moment of impact. Trauma can do strange things to memory. But as we'll see, the evidence in McKenzie's case started to tell a very different story.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting.
Right.
We start to see this clash between initial perceptions and the mounting evidence. While some in the community saw it as a heartbreaking accident, others, especially those who knew, McKenzie and Dominic began to voice suspicions. Their relationship was reportedly tumultuous, and some whispered about possible foul play.
And then there's the whole social media aspect, which adds another layer of complexity. You got McKenzie's post after the accident, some seemingly carefree juxtaposed against the growing suspicions of those who knew her. It really highlights the disconnect between online personas and the messy realities of our lives.
And it's that disconnect that fueled a lot of the online debate.
Right.
Remember the controversy surrounding that Halloween photo, McKenzie dressed up in a costume?
Yeah.
That some interpreted as mocking the crash, sparking outrage and raising questions about her character and lack of remorse. This photo, more than anything, turned the case into a viral sensation.
Right.
With people dissecting her every online move, searching for clues, for answers, for some kind of understanding.
It's almost like the court of public opinion
Yeah.
convened online with everyone weighing in, judging, speculating.
Right.
It's a lot to unpack for sure, but that's exactly why we're here. We're going to walk you through all of it. The evidence, the testimonies, the competing narratives, so you can form your own informed opinion about this case.
And speaking of evidence, that's where we really start to see the narrative shift. The investigation uncovered a series of red flags that challenged the initial perception of a tragic accident.
Okay.
The police uncovered security footage, witness testimonies, and most crucially, the car's black box data. And that's where the case takes a truly dark turn. So about a year after the crash, the investigation culminated in McKenzie's arrest. She was charged with 18 counts, including 4 counts of murder, 2 counts of aggravated murder, and 2 counts of murder. These charges signaled a significant shift in the case, moving away from the narrative of a tragic accident and towards something far more serious: premeditation.
Wow, 18 charges. That's a lot to contend with. What was the prosecution's strategy? What evidence did they use to support such serious charges?
They presented a carefully constructed case aimed at proving that this was no accident, but a deliberate act. The car's black box data became a cornerstone of their argument. It showed that the car was traveling at 100 miles per hour just before impact, and that there was no braking whatsoever. That's a pretty startling revelation, especially when you consider the speed limit, that the area was only 40. It's hard to reconcile that kind of speed with a simple loss of control.
That black box data is pretty damning. But wasn't the defense arguing about airbag interference? How strong was that counter-argument?
They did raise the issue of airbag interference, suggesting that it could have contributed to the severity of the crash and potentially hampered McKenzie's ability to control the car in those final seconds. However, the prosecution countered by pointing out that the black box data clearly showed the car was accelerating, not decelerating, in the moments leading up to the crash. This suggests that even if there was airbag interference, it wouldn't have been the primary cause of the high speed.
So speed was a huge factor. But what about the security camera footage you mentioned earlier? What did those videos show?
There were two key videos that the prosecution presented. One showed the car speeding just before the crash, corroborating the black box data, but it was the second video that really caught everyone's attention. This footage, captured from a different angle, showed McKenzie driving normally, even braking at a stop sign before making a turn. Then she suddenly accelerates rapidly, heading straight toward the building where the crash occurred. This video suggested a chilling possibility, that she wasn't driving erratically the whole time, but rather made a deliberate choice to speed up in those final moments.
It's almost as if she was aiming for the building. That's terrifying. But the prosecution still needed to establish a motive, a reason why a 17-year-old girl would do such a thing.
Right. The prosecution built their case around the turbulent relationship between McKenzie and Dominic. They called witnesses who testified about McKenzie's volatile behavior towards Dominic, painting a picture of a relationship marked by frequent arguments and possessive behavior.
Okay.
One of the most chilling pieces of testimony came from a friend of Dominic's who recounted a time when McKenzie threatened to crash her car with Dominic inside. This alleged threat happened just 2 weeks before the fatal crash.
So the prosecution was trying to demonstrate a pattern of behavior, essentially arguing that McKenzie had threatened this kind of action before and tragically followed through on that threat.
But what about the defense? How did they try to counter such a strong case? The defense faced an uphill battle, but their strategy focused on sowing seeds of doubt, offering alternative explanations for what happened. They argued that the prosecution hadn't conclusively proven premeditation, suggesting that the crash could have been a result of recklessness or a momentary lapse in judgment, rather than a cold-blooded plan. They pointed to the lack of clarity about who was controlling the steering wheel in those final seconds, suggesting that Dominic might have grabbed the wheel or that there could have been some kind of struggle.
So they were essentially arguing that things got out of hand.
Yeah.
That it wasn't intentional.
Exactly. They painted a picture of a tragic accident, fueled by teenage emotions, impulsivity, and perhaps a bit of recklessness. They even introduced the possibility of airbag interference as a mitigating factor, suggesting that it could have hindered McKenzie's ability to regain control of the car. But perhaps their most compelling argument revolved around McKenzie's mental state. They called McKenzie's mother to the stand, and her testimony introduced a whole new layer to the story.
So the defense brought in McKenzie's mother. What was her testimony like?
Her testimony was pretty emotional. She offered a very different perspective on McKenzie, describing her as a loving daughter who was deeply affected by the crash and haunted by the loss of Dominic. She challenged the prosecution's portrayal of McKenzie as cold and calculating, emphasizing her youth and the possibility that she was simply overwhelmed by a situation that spiraled out of control. But her most impactful claim involved a medical condition called POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
TOTS. I'm not familiar with that.
It's a condition that can cause dizziness, fainting, and rapid heartbeat, especially when standing up. McKenzie's mother testified that McKenzie had been experiencing symptoms of POTS and that it could have contributed to the crash. She suggested that McKenzie might have experienced a medical episode while driving, leading to the loss of control. This introduced a new element of doubt into the case, raising the question whether the crash could have been a medical accident rather than a deliberate act.
So the defense was essentially arguing that McKenzie's actions, or lack of action, were not intentional, but a result of this medical condition. Did the prosecution challenge this claim?
They did. They called their own medical experts, who testified that while POTS can cause dizziness, it's unlikely to have caused the kind of high-speed, sustained acceleration seen in the security footage and black box data. They argued that McKenzie's mother's testimony was based on anecdotal evidence, and that there was no medical documentation to support the claim that McKenzie had been formally diagnosed with POTS. It became a battle of medical opinions, leaving the judge to decide which expert testimony was more credible.
It sounds like this case really hinged on the judge's interpretation of the evidence and testimonies. What was the atmosphere in the courtroom like during the trial?
It was tense, to say the least. The courtroom was packed with family members of both the victims and the defendant, all grappling with the weight of the tragedy and the conflicting emotions of grief, anger, and the search for justice. The judge was tasked with sifting through the emotional testimonies, the technical data, and the competing narratives to determine the truth. A daunting task in a case with so many layers and uncertainties.
So after all the testimony and evidence, after all the arguments and counter-arguments, what was the verdict?
After 4 days of trial, the judge delivered a powerful statement condemning McKenzie's actions. She rejected the defense's arguments about a medical episode or lack of control, stating unequivocally that the evidence pointed to a deliberate act. She cited the security footage showing McKenzie accelerating toward the building, the black box data showing no braking, and the testimony about McKenzie's previous threats. She found McKenzie guilty on all 18 counts, including the 4 counts of murder. The courtroom was stunned into silence.
Wow, guilty on all counts. It must have been a heavy moment for everyone in the courtroom. What was the sentence?
The judge sentenced McKenzie to 15 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. She emphasized the gravity of McKenzie's choices, highlighting the lasting impact on the victims' families and the community. She acknowledged McKenzie's age, but stressed that accountability was paramount, regardless of the circumstances.
It's a stark reminder that actions have consequences. Yeah. And that sometimes even in the midst of youthful recklessness, those consequences can be devastating. Did McKenzie have anything to say during the sentencing?
She did. She offered an apology to the families of Dominic and Devon, expressing remorse for their loss. But her apology was met with mixed reactions, with some perceiving it as genuine, while others saw it as a calculated attempt to mitigate her sentence. The families of the victims delivered heartbreaking impact statements, expressing their grief, their anger, and their struggle to comprehend the loss of their loved ones. The judge acknowledged their pain, emphasizing that no sentence could truly heal the wounds inflicted by this tragedy.
This case really brings up so many complex issues. We've got the reckless nature of youth, the dangers of toxic relationships, the impact of social media scrutiny, the complexities of the legal system, and the heart-wrenching consequences of one fateful night. It's a lot to process, and it leaves us with so many lingering questions.
It does. The McKenzie-Sharilla case is a stark reminder of the power of choices, the fragility of life, and the enduring impact of tragedy. It challenges us to think critically about the information we consume, the narratives we construct, and the ways in which we seek justice, and understanding in a world where nothing is ever truly black and white.
So what do you think is the most crucial piece of information that has shaped your opinion on this case? Was it the black box data, the security footage, the testimonies, or something else entirely? And what does this case tell us about the broader challenges we face when seeking truth and justice in the digital age? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share your insights and questions about this deep dive. And be sure to subscribe for more insightful explorations of the world around us.